The bell in the west tower had not yet finished its fourth stroke when I heard the sound that would divide my life into the part before and the part after. A single heavy thud against the inner door of the king's private study, followed by the soft, terrible clatter of something brass rolling across stone. I knew that floor. I had stood on the gallery outside the Star Room for 11 years, long enough to know the difference between a chair pushed back and a man falling. A chair scrapes. A man does not. A man comes down all at once, the way a tower comes down, and the silence that follows is not the silence of a room at rest. It is the silence of a room that is waiting for someone to do something. My name is Corbin Vane. On that morning I was a sergeant of the King's Guard of Eldermoor, 29 years in the service of the Royal House of Harrogate, and I was standing my post outside the doors where King Edmund, old now, frail in the way the great are never supposed to be allowed to become, had gone in alone to read his morning letters. He had waved off his secretary at the threshold. He always did. An old man wants 1 hour, he had told me once years before, where no one is measuring him. I had given him that hour every morning I could. I gave it to him that morning too. And then the thud. I did not think. That is the first thing I want set down plainly, because in the days that followed a great many people would ask me what I had been thinking, and the honest answer is nothing. There was no thought. There was only the long iron rail of training laid down in me over 29 years, and my hand was already on the latch before my mind had caught up to my hand. The door was locked from the inside. Of course it was. He locked it himself every morning, with the small key he kept on a chain at his waist, the same key that was now, I understood with a cold drop in my stomach, somewhere on the floor of that room beside a fallen man. I struck the door once with the flat of my shoulder, the way we are taught, low and driving, not the chest. It held. The Star Room doors were 300 years of seasoned oak banded in iron, built in a harder age to keep armies out, and they were not going to give to one man's shoulder. I knew that even as I hit it. I hit it anyway, because the body must be told that it has tried before the mind is allowed to choose the next thing. The next thing was the bell pull. There is a cord of crimson silk beside the gallery arch, knotted every hand's width, that rings in 3 places at once: the guard room below, the steward's hall, and the physician's stair. I had never pulled it. In 11 years on that post I had never had cause. I pulled it now, 3 long halls, the alarm pattern, and somewhere far below in the bones of the palace, a hard brass clamor began that I felt in my teeth more than heard. Then I turned back to the door and made my voice flat and level, the parade ground voice that carries without shouting, the voice that does not let panic into a room through the cracks. Your Majesty. It's Vane, I'm coming into you. Hold on, sir, I'm coming in. There was no answer. I had not expected one. But you say it anyway. You say it because a fallen man's ears may be working when nothing else is, and the last thing a frightened man should hear is another frightened man. So I kept my voice the way you keep a horse calm in fire, low, sure, unhurried even when every part of you is screaming to hurry, and I went down the gallery at a dead run to the second door. There is always a second door. That is something the public does not know about palaces, and something every guard learns in his first month. The grand rooms have a servant's passage, a narrow throat of a corridor behind the paneling where the fires are laid and the trays are carried, and it connects to the great rooms through a low jib door cut to look like part of the wainscot. The Star Room had one. I had walked it 100 times in my early years, carrying nothing, learning the bones of the place because an old corporal named Hask had told me. A guard who only knows the front of a house knows half a house, and half a house will get your king killed. I had thought him grim. I had been 22, and I had thought a great many wise men grim. I thought of Corporal Hask as I came around through the paneling that morning, and I have thought of him every day since. The jib door into the Star Room opened from the passage side. No lock on that face. Why would there be, when no one was meant to know it was a door at all? I went through it into the dim of the study, the heavy curtains still half drawn against the early sun, and I saw him. The king was on the floor between his great desk and the cold hearth, half on his side, one arm flung out across the carpet, the other folded beneath him. His morning letters had gone everywhere, a drift of white across the dark wool of the rug, and the brass paper knife, the brass I had heard rolling, lay against the fender. His face, when I came round to it and went down on one knee, was the gray of old ash, his lips gone a color I will not describe because his children are alive and may one day read this. He was breathing. I want that set down at once, because in the telling it is easy to make a thing worse than it was for the sake of the telling, and I will not do that to him. He was breathing shallow, ragged, with a long pause between each breath that frightened me more than no breath would have. And there was a pulse under my fingers when I pressed them to the side of his throat, fast and thin, and stumbling like a runner who has gone too far. "I have you," I said to him low, close to his ear. "I have you, sir. Help is coming. You are not alone." He did not answer, but something moved behind his half-closed eyes, not toward me, not away, just the small flutter of a man very far down trying to find the surface, and I have chosen to believe he heard me. A man is allowed to choose what to believe about the things he cannot prove, and I have chosen that. I did not move him more than I had to. We are taught it harder than almost anything, because the instinct when a great man falls is to gather him up, to make him decent, to lift him into a chair so that he is a king again and not a heap on a floor. The instinct is wrong. You do not haul a fallen man about until you know what has broken in him. I turned his head a little gently, so that his airway was clear, and so that if he were sick he would not drown in it, and I loosed the high stiff collar at his throat and the chain at his waist with the little fallen key still on it. And then I did the hardest thing the whole morning asked of me. I held still. I knelt on the floor of the star room with my dying king's pulse under 2 fingers, and I held still, and I counted his breaths, and I waited, because the help I had rung for was on its way, and the worst thing I could do now was the thing my whole body wanted, which was to act. There is a kind of courage that looks like doing nothing. No one writes songs about it. I knelt in it that morning until the door behind me began to shake with the fists of men who could not get in. The front door of the star room, the locked one, the great oak, boomed under blows. Voices came through it, muffled and climbing toward the high thin pitch I had heard before in men who have just learned that something has gone wrong above their station to fix. I recognized the understeward's voice, and a footman's, and beneath them the steady tread of someone who was not running, and that steady tread was the first good sound I had heard since the bell. "The key is in here," I called, pitching my voice to carry through the oak without lifting it into a shout. "I'm with the king. I've come through the service passage. Do not break this door, there's no time to clear the wreck of it. Send the physician round through the kitchen stair to the jib in the paneling. Tell him the green corridor, 3rd panel past the linen press. Go." A beat of silence on the other side, the silence of men who have been given a clear order and are grateful for it, because a clear order is a rope thrown to a drowning man, and then the understeward's voice, steadier now. "Green corridor, 3rd panel. Aye, sergeant." And feet going the right way at last. I have thought often about that small thing. I gave them a door to use and a route to run and a thing to say when they got there, and the panic went out of their voices like water out of a tipped cup. It is the oldest lesson of the post and the truest. Men do not panic because a thing is terrible. Men panic because they do not know what to do with their hands. Give them a task and you give them their hands back. I learned that from Hask too, though he put it less kindly. The king's breath caught a long, shuddering hitch, and I bent close. "Stay with me, sir," I said. "Your physician's on the stair, your daughter's in the palace. You are not going anywhere this morning, not on my watch." I do not know if I believed it. I said it the way you say the words that need saying whether or not the saying makes them true. I want to tell you plainly who he was, not the king of the histories, the one the schoolbooks of Eldermoor draw in profile on the coins, but the man on the floor. Edmund Harrogate had reigned for 41 years. When I came to the guard as a raw recruit, he had already been on the throne longer than I had been alive, and he had been to me then exactly what he was to every boy in the realm. A face on a coin, a voice on the wireless at the new year, a figure under a canopy who lifted one gloved hand to a roaring crowd. It is a strange thing to spend your working life a few feet from a coin. You learn the man behind it slowly in pieces by accident. I learned that he hummed, very quietly and very badly, when he thought no one could hear. I learned that he kept a child's drawing folded inside the cover of his appointment book. His granddaughter, the Princess Malin, had drawn him a lopsided son when she was 4, and he carried it still. I learned that on the anniversary of the late Queen's death he asked, every year, for 1 hour alone with the door locked, and that the morning I now describe was not that anniversary but the same hour, the same locked door, the same old man wanting 1 hour where no one was measuring him. No one was measuring him now. He was past all measuring. He was just a breathing thing on a carpet with a guardsman's 2 fingers at his throat, and I would have given the whole 29 years of my service to put him back behind his coin. The third panel opened. Dr. Aldous Wren came through it sideways, the way a big man comes through a small door, his bag already open in his hand and his coat half off one shoulder where he had been pulling it on at the run. He was the palace physician, a heavy, slow-spoken man who had attended the king for 20 years and who, I am glad to say, did not waste one breath of that morning on horror. His eyes went to the king, to the angle of his head, to the loosened collar, to my 2 fingers at the throat, and he gave a single short nod. The nod of a craftsman who finds the job has already been started correctly, and he was down on both knees on the other side before his bag had finished settling. "How long?" he said. "From the fall near 4 minutes," I said. "He's breathing the whole time, long gaps, pulse fast and thin. He stirred once when I spoke. He's not moved since." "You didn't shift him?" "Only his head for the airway." "And his collar and his chain?" "Good man," said Wren, and in those 2 words there was more relief than a longer speech could have carried. He bent to his work. I will not set down the medicine of it, partly because I am no physician and would get it wrong, and partly because some things that happen to a man on a floor belong to him, and to the doctor who saved him and to no one else, not even the guard who was there. What I will say is this: there is a way that a skilled man works in a crisis that is itself a kind of calm you can lean on. Wren's hands did not hurry and they did not stop. He spoke to the king, the whole time in the same low, steady tone I had used, telling him each thing before he did it, as though the old man were merely a difficult patient and not a falling kingdom, and I understood that he was doing for the king exactly what I had done for the understeward through the door, giving the unconscious man, on the chance he could hear, the gift of an unfrightened voice. I need him on the floor flat, and I need the room cleared of all but the 2 of us, and I need a litter and 4 steady men at the front door in 5 minutes, not before, with that great oak open and quiet, no crowd, no running, Wren said, all without looking up. "Can you get me that, Sergeant?" "You'll have it," I said. And here I will tell the truth that does me no credit, because this is meant to be a true account, and a true account must hold the moments where a man's own fear shows him to himself. As I rose to go and arrange the things the doctor needed, the litter, the 4 steady men, the cleared and quiet hall, I did not want to leave the room. I had been the only thing between that man and the dark for 4 minutes, and some animal part of me had decided that if I stayed kneeling there with my fingers at his pulse, then he could not slip, and that if I rose and went out, I would be letting go of the rope. It is not reason. It is the thing under reason. I had to take that part of myself by the collar, the way I had taken the door, and tell it that the king's life now lay in better hands than mine, and that the most useful thing I could do for him was to walk out of the room I most wanted to stay in and go and command the chaos in the hall. So I went. I came up off my knee. I gave the king one last look, Wren's broad back bent over him, the gray face, the slow, terrible breaths, and I went to the front door of the star room, turned the great key that I took from the chain where it had fallen, and drew open the oak on the largest crowd I had ever seen gathered in that gallery. Every face turned to me, every mouth half open with the question none of them dared ask. What I saw in that crowd, in the second before I spoke, told me that the king's collapse was not going to be the hardest thing I faced that day. There were perhaps 30 people in the gallery, footmen, 2 understewards, a clerk with an armful of letters still clutched to his chest, 3 of my own guardsmen who had come up from the guard room at the bell, and in the center of them all, standing very still while everyone else jostled, a tall, narrow man in the black and silver of the chancellery. Lord Merivale Thorn, Lord Chancellor of Eldermoor. I knew him, of course. Everyone at court knew him. He was the man who stood at the king's elbow at every council, the keeper of the Great Seal, the voice that spoke last in any room and somehow always seemed to have spoken the deciding word. He was clever in the way that makes lesser men feel slow and powerful men feel managed, and he had been at the king's side for so long that the line between the king's authority and Thorn's had worn thin in places. I had stood guard at enough council doors to know that thin line, and to know that Lord Thorn knew exactly where it ran. He was looking at me with an expression of such perfect, grave concern that I felt the hairs lift on my neck, because perfect, grave concern, arriving that fast, is a thing a man has to have prepared. "Sergeant Vane," he said before I could speak, and his voice cut clean across the babble of the gallery and stilled it. "Thank heaven! What has happened? Is His Majesty—" He let the sentence fall decently, as a man does who is too well-bred to finish it. "His Majesty has been taken ill," I said, and I kept my parade voice flat and carrying. "Dr. Wren is with him. I need this gallery cleared but for 4 men. I need a litter. I need the green corridor and the kitchen stair kept open and quiet. The rest of you back to the long hall and wait." It was a guardsman's order, plainly given, and 3/4 of that crowd began at once to move, grateful again for a thing to do with their hands. But Lord Thorn did not move, and because he did not move, a handful of others, the clerk, the senior understeward, a chamber page, did not move either, looking from him to me and back, and in that small hesitation I felt the morning turn. "Quite right, Sergeant." "Quite right," said Thorn smoothly, stepping forward so that he stood between me and the dispersing crowd, half turning his shoulder to me so that he addressed them as much as he answered me. "Steady, everyone, steadiness now above all. The sergeant has done well." A graceful little spread of his long hands. "But this is a matter of state now as much as a matter of health, and the burden of it falls by the king's own ordinances upon the chancellery in the first instance. I will take charge here." He turned the full weight of his attention back on me, and his eyes were calm and his voice was kind, and underneath both of them was iron. "Sergeant, you've borne up admirably. Let me relieve you of it. I'll have the gallery sealed, the household informed in good order, and the proper notifications made. No word is to leave this floor, you understand, until I have determined what may safely be said. The realm must not be panicked by a half-told tale. You will take your men and seal the outer stair and admit no one without my word. No one." Every sentence of it was reasonable. That is the thing I have tried to make people understand in the years since, when they ask how a man like Thorn could nearly carry it off in a gallery full of honest servants. Every single sentence was reasonable. A great man had collapsed. The realm should not be panicked. Words should be controlled. Someone in authority should take charge. Each piece, held up alone, was sensible and even wise. It was only when you set them side by side and saw the shape they made together that you saw what was being built. A wall around a sick king, with one man holding the only door. And one phrase had snagged in me like a hook, until I have determined what may safely be said, not until the queen is told, not until the heir is at her father's side, until I have determined. I want to be careful here, because I am an honest narrator, and Lord Thorn, whatever else he was never charged with the crime my heart accused him of in that gallery, and a man may not be hanged on a guardsman's bad feeling. I did not know, standing there, that he meant any harm. I knew only this, that the chain of duty in the royal house of Eldermoor did not run to the chancellery when the king fell. It ran to the heir. It ran to the king's daughter, the Princess Royal Saralind, who was at that hour somewhere in the east wing with her own 2 children, who had not yet been told that her father was dying on a carpet 200 yards from where she sat. The first duty of the king's guard when the king is stricken is not to control the news. It is to get the rightful authority of the realm to the king's side and to keep the king safe until they come. That is the whole of it. That is the bone under all the ceremony. So I did the thing that nearly ended my career, and that I would do again without one heartbeat's hesitation. "With respect, my lord," I said, and I did not move from the doorway. "I cannot do that." The gallery went very quiet. Lord Thorne's eyebrows rose by perhaps 1/4 of an inch. It was, I think, the largest expression of surprise that careful face had permitted itself in years. "I beg your pardon, Sergeant. My orders in this circumstance are fixed, and they are not yours to alter, my lord, and I mean no disrespect in saying so." I kept my voice level and quiet and aimed it at him alone, but a quiet voice in a silent gallery is heard in every corner, and I knew it. When the king is stricken, the guard's duty is to His Majesty's person and to the lawful succession. The Princess Royal is to be informed at once and conducted to her father, and no man, by your leave, no man at all of whatever rank, gives orders concerning the king's person over the head of his heir. I will keep this floor secure. I will keep it quiet, but the first word that leaves it goes to Her Royal Highness, and it goes now, and it goes from me. I had never in my life spoken so to a great officer of the crown. My own 3 guardsmen had gone still as posts. I saw the senior under-steward's eyes go wide, and I saw, on the face of the young chamber page, something I had not expected, and that steadied me more than I can say. A small, fierce flush of relief, as though the boy had been waiting for someone to say exactly that and had been afraid no one would. Lord Thorne looked at me for a long moment, and then he did a thing that frightened me far more than anger would have. He smiled a small, sorrowful, understanding smile, the smile of a wise man making allowance for a loyal but limited servant, and he said, gently, so gently, to the gallery at large, "You see how it is. A faithful man undone by the strain, we must not be hard on him." He turned to the senior under-steward. "Master Pell, the sergeant is overwrought, it is no wonder. Be so good as to fetch the captain of the guard and the master of the household, that we may have proper authority here and relieve this poor fellow of a weight too great for his rank." His eyes came back to me, mild and certain. "Stand easy, sergeant. Help is coming for you as well." It was beautifully done. In 4 sentences he had turned my act of duty into a symptom, my refusal into a breakdown, and the calling of his own allies into an act of mercy toward me. If Master Pell went, the next men through that gallery would be men prepared to find a sergeant who had cracked under pressure, and they would relieve me, and the wall around the king would be built after all, with the chancellor's hand on the only door. I had perhaps 5 seconds to keep that from happening. I did not argue. That is the mistake the strain wants you to make, to argue, to defend, to prove you are not overwrought by growing visibly more overwrought. I had learned long ago that the man who explains himself in a contest of authority has already half lost, so I did not explain. I acted the way I had acted at the door. "Brennan," I said, not to Thorne but to the tallest of my 3 guardsmen, a steady corporal of 15 years whose face I would have trusted with my own life and did that morning. I did not raise my voice. I gave it the flat weight of the post. "Corporal Brennan, front and center." Brennan stepped forward and came to attention beside me so smartly that the sound of his heel on the stone was its own small thunderclap in the silent gallery. The discipline of it, the plain, clean, unhurried discipline of a guardsman answering his sergeant, did more to settle the room than any words of mine could have, because it told every honest servant present that the king's guard was not, in fact, coming apart at the seams. Here was a sergeant, and here was his corporal, and here was the chain of command standing exactly where it was supposed to stand. "Corporal," I said, "you will go at once to the apartments of the Princess Royal. You will go at the double, but you will not run in the corridors where you may be seen by the household, for we will not start a panic. You will present yourself to Her Royal Highness, or, in her absence, to the senior member of her own guard, and you will say these words and no others. His Majesty has been taken ill in the Star Room and is attended by Dr. Wren. Sergeant Vane requests the Princess Royal's presence and instruction without delay. You will then escort Her Royal Highness here, or you will return with her instruction. You will speak to no one else. You will be turned aside by no one of any rank whatsoever, and if any person attempts to detain or delay you, you will say that you are upon the direct service of the Crown's succession, and you will come through them. Do you have it? His Majesty taken ill, Star Room, Dr. Wren attending. Sergeant Vane requests Her Royal Highness's presence and instruction without delay," Brennan said back, word perfect. "The way we are drilled to repeat an order so that no error can hide in the gap between hearing and doing." "Aye, Sergeant." "Go." He went, and there is a thing about a clear order carried out in front of doubting men. It is very hard to stop. Lord Thorn could have ordered Brennan halted, he had the rank to try, but to do it he would have had to say, aloud, in front of 30 honest servants, "Do not tell the king's daughter that the king is dying," and there is no graceful sentence that says that thing. He knew it. I watched him know it. His mouth opened a fraction and then closed again, and Brennan was through the arch and gone before the Chancellor found a shape of words that would not damn him. And in that small failure I saw the first crack run through the man's perfect composure. But he recovered with a speed that I have to call admirable even now. "Well," he said lightly, spreading those long hands again, "no harm in informing Her Royal Highness, of course. I should have ordered it myself in another moment. The sergeant has merely been hasty. But the question of authority on this floor remains, and that, Master Pell, is a matter for the proper officers." His glance flicked to the senior under-steward, who had not yet moved, caught between two commands. "Go and fetch the captain and the master of the household as I bid you." And here Master Pell did a small brave thing that I have never forgotten, and that I made certain, afterward, was remembered where it should be. He was a gray, careful man of 60, a servant all his life, and a servant's whole training is to obey the highest authority in the room. But he looked at me, and he looked at the closed oak door of the Star Room behind me where his king lay dying, and he looked at the Lord Chancellor, and then he said, in the dry, quiet voice of a man who has decided where he stands and is frightened of it, "Your leave, my lord and the sergeants. I'll fetch the captain of the guard, as is proper, for this is a guard matter while His Majesty's safety is in question. But the master of the household serves at the king's pleasure same as I do, and with His Majesty stricken I'd as soon wait on the word of Her Royal Highness before I go waking half the court. 2 summonses might be one too many in a sick room." He gave a small stiff bow that managed, somehow, to be addressed to both of us and to favor neither. "I'll bring the captain." It was not defiance. It was something better and harder than defiance. It was a careful man choosing, under the eye of the most powerful officer in the realm, to do half of what he was told, and to do it in the way that served the king and not the chancellor. Fetch the captain of the guard, yes, proper, a guard matter. Fetch the master of the household and rouse the wider court, no, not yet, not on Thorn's word alone. He had threaded the needle, and he had done it with a servant's deference so flawless that Thorn could not object without revealing that what he had wanted was the rousing of the court, and not the proper governance of a sick room. "As you think best, Master Pell," said Thorn, after the smallest pause, and the smile he gave the old steward did not reach his eyes. Pell bowed again and withdrew, and I understood, watching the Chancellor watch him go, that Thorn had just lost his second move of the morning, and that he was a man who counted such things, and that he would not lose a third without making me pay for the first 2. For a moment the gallery was almost empty. The footmen had dispersed to the long hall as ordered. The clerk had gone with them. his letters still clutched to his chest. The chamber page lingered at the far arch, unwilling, I think, to leave the only drama of his young life, and I let him stay because a watching boy was a witness, and I had begun to think that morning that witnesses were going to matter. That left in the long gallery with its high windows and its portraits of dead Harrowgates looking down, only myself at the door, 2 of my guardsmen ranged behind me, the boy at the arch and Lord Merivale Thorn. He came a step closer, and he dropped his voice so that only I would hear it, and when the public mildness fell away from his face, what was left underneath was not anger. It was calculation, cool and complete, the face of a man at a board reckoning the pieces. "You're a brave man, Sergeant," he said quietly, "and a loyal one, and I am not your enemy, whatever your nerves are telling you. So I will say this to you once plainly, as one servant of the realm to another, because you have earned plain speaking. The king is an old man, and this is very likely the end of him. When a reign ends, the realm passes through a narrow and dangerous door, and a great deal depends on whose hand is on that door, and on whether the passage is orderly or a scramble. I have given 40 years to making the passages of this realm orderly. You have given your years to standing very still at a post. We are not, I think, equipped to judge each other's work. But I tell you this for nothing. The choices you make in the next hour will be remembered, and they will be remembered by whoever holds the door when it is shut. Be very sure you have chosen the right side of it." It was a threat. It was also, in its cold way, the most honest thing he had said. He was offering me a place on the winning side of a thing that had not happened yet, and warning me what it would cost to be on the other side, and he was doing it with such reasonableness that I understood, finally and completely, what kind of man I was facing. Not a villain out of a tale. Something worse and more ordinary. A clever man who had decided that the realm would be better off in his hands, and who would therefore do whatever an orderly passage required, and call it duty all the while. "I have chosen my side, my lord," I said. "I chose it 29 years ago when I took the oath. There's only the one." Something flickered in his eyes, not respect, I think, but recognition, the way one card player recognizes that another is not bluffing. And then the captain of the guard came through the arch at a fast walk with Master Pell a pace behind, and the second act of that morning began. Captain Halford Drummond was a heavy, blunt soldier of 50, a man I had served under for 9 years and trusted as far as I trusted any officer, which is to say a good deal but not without my eyes open. He was brave, he was honest, and he was, I say this without unkindness, for it is the truth, and the truth matters here, not a quick man. He saw the world in straight lines. He believed in rank the way other men believe in God, as the load-bearing structure of all things, and a straight-line man who believes in rank is exactly the man a Lord Chancellor can use, because the Chancellor outranks a captain, and Captain Drummond's whole soul was built to take an order from a man who outranked him. Thorn saw it too. I watched him see it, and I watched the morning's whole weight shift toward the Chancellor in the space of 3 steps, because here at last was authority of the right shape. A captain who would take Thorn's word, and who could give my own men a lawful order to stand aside. "Captain Drummond," said Thorn, and the public mildness came back over his face like a tide coming in. "Thank God, we have a crisis here and a sergeant overcome by it. His Majesty is gravely ill within. Sergeant Vane has done his initial duty and done it well, but he has refused proper instruction, dispatched a man to alarm the Princess Royal without authority, and now bars this door against the officers of the realm. The strain has been too much for him. I need this floor secured under proper command, your command, Captain, and I need it sealed and quiet while we determine how the realm is to be informed. Will you take charge?" I saw Drummond's eyes go to me, and I saw in them exactly what Thorn had built them to see. A sergeant standing alone before a closed door, having defied the Lord Chancellor, having sent a man off without an officer's leave, his account of himself sounding, when the Chancellor told it, very like the account a man gives of a subordinate who has cracked. The straight lines were all running Thorn's way. Drummond's hand actually rose toward me, the gesture of a captain about to relieve a sergeant of his post. "Sergeant Vane," he said heavily, "stand down and make your report. And I will tell you the truth of what I felt, which was a great wave of weariness, because I knew that if I argued my case, I would sound like the broken man Thorn had painted, and that Drummond would hear a sergeant arguing with a captain in front of the Lord Chancellor, and would relieve me on the principle of the thing, and the door would pass to a man who would do whatever Thorn told him to do. The straight-line virtue that made Drummond honest was the very thing that made him useless to me here. So once again I did not argue. I made my report, the whole of it, flat, fast, in the bare grammar of the parade ground, the way a guardsman renders an account so that no officer can mistake feeling for fact. "Captain." At 4 bells I heard His Majesty fall behind the locked study door. I rang the alarm cord, attempted the oak, could not force it, entered by the service jib in the green corridor. Found His Majesty collapsed, breathing, pulse present. Cleared his airway, loosed his collar, did not otherwise move him. Rang for the physician and routed Dr. Wren to the jib. Dr. Wren now attends His Majesty within and requires the floor cleared but for himself, a litter, and 4 steady men in good order. I sent Corporal Brennan to inform Her Royal Highness the Princess Royal, and to request her presence and instruction, per standing orders for the King's incapacity, which require the heir to be informed and brought to the King's person without delay and without intermediary. I have refused and do refuse to seal this floor against Her Royal Highness, or to hold the first report of His Majesty's condition for the determination of any officer of the Crown, of whatever rank, save the heir herself. That is the whole of my report, Captain. I had given him the facts and only the facts, and I had buried the heart of the matter, the standing orders for the King's incapacity, in the middle of the recital where it could not be argued with because it was not an opinion. It was the regulation. It was in the book. Drummond knew the book. A straight-line man always knows the book. I saw him stop. I watched the straight lines that had all been running Thorn's way meet, in Captain Drummond's slow and honest mind, the one straight line that ran the other way, the regulation, the heir to be informed without delay and without intermediary. That was not a thing a sergeant had invented under strain. That was the law of the guard, written in the same book Drummond carried in his own breast as the load-bearing structure of all things, and it said, in plain words that no chancellor's smooth speech could bend, that the man standing in front of me had done precisely, exactly, by the letter the thing the book required, and that the man beside me had asked him not to. Without intermediary, Drummond repeated slowly, and his blunt face turned by degrees like a gun turret coming round from me to Lord Thorn. That's the standing order, my lord. Article 11. The heirs to be told and brought, no man between. The sergeants followed it to the letter. Of course, said Thorn, and only because I was watching for it did I see the muscle tighten at the hinge of his jaw. I do not dispute the article, Captain. The Princess Royal is being informed. I welcome it. The question is one of order on this floor, of preventing a wider panic. Then we're agreed, my lord, for there's no quarrel, said Drummond, with the heavy relief of a simple man who has found that the two authorities he must obey are not, after all, in conflict, and in his relief he handed me, without knowing it, the whole morning back. The sergeant secures the floor under Article 11, Her Royal Highness is sent for under Article 11, and we keep it quiet, as you rightly say, my lord, till she comes and gives her word. He turned to me. Carry on, sergeant. You've done right. I'll set a cordon at the stairhead and let no one up, no one, barring Her Royal Highness and her people, and whoever the doctor calls for. My lord, you'll want to be here to receive Her Royal Highness. I don't doubt, and so will I. It was, without his ever intending it, a complete defeat for Lord Thorn, delivered by a man too honest to know he had delivered it. Drummond had not taken a side. He had simply done the regulation, and the regulation took my side, because the regulation had been written long ago by men who had foreseen exactly this. The moment when a stricken king lies behind a door and some clever, reasonable man arrives to explain why the heir should wait. The article existed because of men like Thorn. I had never loved a paragraph so much in my life. Corporal Brennan came back at the head of a small, fast company, and at the heart of it walked the Princess Royal Saralind. I had guarded her, on and off, for the better part of 20 years, since she was a girl of 15, and I a young guardsman who had once, memorably, had to pretend with a perfectly straight face not to notice her climbing out of a ground-floor window to escape a tedious tutor. She was a woman of 40 now, the king's only living child, the heir to the throne of Eldermoor, and I had watched her grow into the kind of authority that cannot be taught and cannot be bought, the kind that comes from a person who has decided, somewhere deep down, that she is responsible for things. She came up that gallery fast but not running, her face white, her 2 children kept back behind her with their own nurse and their own guard at the arch. For she had thought, even in that first terrible minute, to spare Malin and Joran the sight of their grandfather carried out on a litter, and that one decision told me everything about the queen she would become. "Sergeant Vane," she said, reaching me. "Where is he? How is he? Tell me plainly." "Within, Your Royal Highness, with Dr. Wren," I said. "He fell perhaps 15 minutes since. He has been breathing throughout and his pulse was present when I left him. Dr. Wren has not yet given me his judgment, but he worked steadily and asked for a litter and a quiet hall to move His Majesty, which is not the asking of a man who has given up. I'll not tell you more than I know, ma'am, and I'll not soften what I do know. That is the whole of it." She looked at me for the space of one breath, and I saw her take the measure of the plainness I had offered her and find in it the one thing she needed, which was the truth told level. "Thank you," she said. "Open the door." I opened the oak. She went in to her father, and I shut it behind her, not against her, but for her, so that whatever passed between a daughter and her stricken father passed unwatched by the gallery, and I stood my post outside it as I had stood it 10,000 mornings, except that now there were tears standing in my own eyes that I did not let fall, because the post does not weep on duty, and the post was the only thing holding me up. Lord Thorn did not follow her in. He could not now, not past the captain's cordon and the article and the closed door, and I watched him understand that the moment of the wide-open vacuum, the moment when a sick king is on the floor and the heir has not yet been told, and a clever man might step into the gap and seem, for an hour, to be the realm itself, had passed. The gap had closed. The heir was at the king's side. The succession had a face and a name and a daughter's hand on her father's gray cheek, and it was not Marival Thorn's. But a clever man does not spend 40 years climbing to the right hand of a throne and then surrender his whole design because one sergeant followed one article. I knew that. As I stood at the door, I made myself think it through coldly, the way I had been taught to think through a threat at the gate. Not what has he tried, but what will he try next? The first vacuum had closed, so he would make a second one. If he could not be the realm while the king lay stricken, he would make himself indispensable to the realm that the stricken king left behind, and the surest way to do that, for a man who held the Great Seal, was to control what was written down. The notifications, the record, the official account of how the king had fallen, who had been present, who had acted, and who had failed. The history of that morning was about to be written, and Lord Thorn held the pen, and a man who holds the pen can make a sergeant who followed Article 11 into a sergeant who manhandled a dying king, locked out his rightful ministers, and very nearly cost the realm its orderly succession. I had won the hour, I had not won the morning. And I understood, standing at that door, that I was going to have to fight a second battle that I was even worse equipped for than the first, a battle of records and witnesses and the official account, and that I, a sergeant who had spent his life learning to stand still and say nothing, was going to have to learn very fast how to make sure the truth of that morning could not be quietly rewritten by the cleverest man in the kingdom. The door opened. The Princess Royal came out, and her eyes were red but her voice was iron. "Dr. Wren will move my father to his bedchamber now," she said, to the gallery at large, in the clear carrying tone of a woman who has just decided to be in charge of a kingdom. "Captain Drummond, your 4 steadiest men, and quietly. Sergeant Vane, you will walk at my father's head where you have been since he fell. No one else comes near him. No one." Her gaze went once to Lord Thorne, and there was nothing in it but a cold and perfect courtesy that was somehow more final than anger. "My Lord Chancellor, I am grateful for your concern. The realm is not without governance. It has an heir, and the heir is awake, and the heir will see to it. You may attend me in the council room in 1 hour, when my father is settled, and we will speak of what must be done. Until then, this floor is the guard's, and the guard answers to me." It was masterly. She had not accused him of anything. She could not, any more than I could, on a bad feeling and a snagged phrase, but she had taken back, in 4 sentences, every inch of ground he had reached for. The governance, the floor, the king's person, the control of what came next. The realm is not without governance. It has an heir. She had heard, somehow, in Brennan's brief report, or in the very air of the gallery, exactly what the danger had been, and she had answered it not with a charge but with a fact, the same way I had answered Drummond. The fact was unanswerable. There was an heir. She was it. And no clever speech about orderly passages could stand against a wide-awake heir standing in the middle of her own palace giving lawful commands. Lord Thorne bowed, a deep, graceful, faultless bow, the bow of a man yielding the floor and conceding nothing. "Your Royal Highness honors me," he said. "In 1 hour." And he withdrew down the gallery with his unhurried tread, and I watched him go, and I thought, there walks a man who has lost a battle and not yet decided he has lost a war. We moved the king. I will hold the curtain on most of it. For the same reason I held it on the medicine, because a great man being carried helpless through his own house is a sight that belongs to him and to his family and not to the world. But I will set down the one thing that I have carried with me ever since, the thing that was, I think, the true center of that whole long day, around which all the schemes and the articles and the council rooms turned like the rim of a wheel around its hub. As we lifted the litter, the king's hand came loose and fell over the side, and I, walking at his head as the princess had bidden, caught it without thinking, the way you catch anything that falls. And the old man's fingers, gray, cold, the fingers of a man very far down, closed on mine, just for a moment. Just the smallest pressure, the kind of thing a doubting man would tell himself he had imagined. But I had 2 fingers at his pulse for 4 minutes on that floor, and I knew the difference between the body's reflex and a man's choice, and that was a choice. He could not speak, and he could not see me, and he did not know my name in that moment, I am sure. But some deep part of Edmund Harrowgate, falling, had felt a hand and chosen to hold it, and I held it back, all the long way to his bedchamber, and I did not let go until the doctor needed it. I have been honored many times since for what I did that morning. They have given me ribbons and a place at ceremonies and words in the great hall that I did not deserve, and could not have spoken myself for the lump in my throat. But if you ask me what I am proud of, it is not the door or the article or the standing against the chancellor. It is that when my king's hand fell, I caught it, and when it closed on mine, I held on. They settled the king in his bedchamber, and Dr. Wren sent for 2 more physicians from the city quietly by the back gates, and for some hours the news that came out to me at the door was no news at all, which Wren told me passing once was the best news there was. "He is holding," he said low, his big hands gray with weariness. "He has not worsened. In a thing like this, Sergeant, not worse is the whole of the battle for the first day. You bought him those minutes on the floor. I want you to know that. Whatever else happens in this house today, the man is alive at this hour because you did not panic and did not move him and rang the right bell, and a great many men with finer titles than yours would have done one of those 3 things wrong." He clasped my shoulder once briefly and went back in. "I have been given ribbons, as I said. None of them weighed what those few words weighed. I would have stood that door until I fell, but the Princess Royal, I should begin to call her by what she was becoming. For within the day the word regent would be spoken in the council room, and the realm would, in all but ceremony, pass into her keeping. The Princess Royal sent for me to attend her in the council room before the hour was out. I left my post to Corporal Brennan, who took it with a face that told me he understood exactly what he was being trusted with, and I went down to the council room not knowing that I was walking into the second battle, and that it would be fought not with shoulders against oak doors, but with words across a polished table, which is the kind of fighting a sergeant is born to lose. The council room of Harrogate Palace is a long, dark, paneled chamber with a table of black oak down its center, old enough that there are scars in the wood where the swords of harder centuries were laid, and at the head of it, in the king's chair pointedly left empty beside her, sat the Princess Royal. Lord Thorne was there, of course, at her right hand where he had sat for 40 years. Captain Drummond was there. The master of the household, a fussy, anxious man named Lord Castle, had been roused after all and sat fluttering with papers, and there were 2 clerks of the Chancellery at the table's foot, with ink and great bound books open before them, and it was those 2 clerks, not Lord Thorne, that I should have feared, for they were the pen, and the pen is mightier than any sergeant. "Sergeant Vane," said the Princess Royal, "I have asked you here because you are the only person who was present from the first moment of my father's collapse, and the Chancellery is preparing the official record of this day, and that record must be true. Tell the table what happened, plainly, as you told me. Lord Thorne, your clerks will take it down." And there it was, the trap, beautifully set, and set not by the princess, who meant only honesty, but by the man at her right hand who had agreed, no doubt with grave enthusiasm, that the record must above all be true. For now I would give my account and the clerks would take it down, and then I saw it coming the way you see a horse shy a half-second before it bolts. Lord Thorne would gently, reasonably, in the interest of accuracy, propose his corrections. I gave my account. The same flat, bare, parade-ground account I had given Drummond, the facts and only the facts, the bell and the oak and the jib and the airway and the pulse and the litter, Article 11, Corporal Brennan, the princess summoned and brought. I did not say one word about Lord Thorne. I did not accuse him of anything in front of him at his own clerk's table on a feeling and a snagged phrase. I had learned that much. I gave them the morning as a soldier gives a report, and I sat down. "Thank you, Sergeant," said the Princess Royal. "It is a clear account and it accords with my own knowledge of what I found. Let it be entered as given." "If I may, your Royal Highness," said Lord Thorne. Here it came. "The sergeant's account is admirable," he said, "and I do not doubt one word of it as to the medical particulars, in which he plainly acquitted himself with great credit. Let that be recorded, and warmly. The realm owes him those 4 minutes, as the physician says." A graceful bow of the head toward me, and I felt the trap's jaws move, for a man who praises you generously in his first breath is very often about to gut you in his second. "But the record must be complete as well as true, ma'am, and there is a matter the sergeant has, from modesty or from the natural confusion of a terrible morning, omitted. When I arrived in the gallery, the sergeant was, understandably, in a state of considerable agitation, as who would not be? And he refused, at first, the ordinary instruction of the Chancellery, and dispatched a man to alarm your Royal Highness before any officer had assessed the situation, and barred the door for some minutes against the proper officers of the Crown. I raise it not to reproach him, heaven forbid. The man is a hero of the hour, but because the record, ma'am, if it omits the irregularities, becomes a poor guide for the next such morning, which God send never comes, but for which we must none the less leave honest instruction. Let it show that the sergeant acted bravely, and also that there was, for some minutes, a dangerous want of order on that floor, which we must take care to prevent in future by clearer rules of command." He turned his mild, regretful gaze on me. I am sure the sergeant, on reflection, would not wish the record to pretend the morning was tidier than it was. It was the most dangerous thing anyone said to me all day, and it was the most dangerous precisely because so much of it was true. I had refused the chancellery's instruction. I had dispatched a man to inform the princess before Thorn had assessed the situation. I had barred the door for some minutes. Every fact was a fact. And strung together by his telling, the facts made a picture of a brave but unsteady man who had created a dangerous want of order. And from that picture would come, in the cold paragraphs, the clerks were even now poising their pens to write clearer rules of command, which is to say, rules that put the chancellery's hand on the next sick king's door, so that no inconvenient sergeant could ever again follow Article 11 over a chancellor's objection. He was not trying to ruin me. Ruining me was beneath his purpose. He was using my mourning to write a rule, and the rule was the prize, and I was merely the cautionary tale that justified it. And I could feel the table beginning to tilt his way. Lord Castle was nodding, anxious always to agree with order. Captain Drummond looked troubled, for the words dangerous want of order landed on a straight-line man like a stone, and he was beginning, I could see, to wonder if perhaps there had been a want of order after all, since the Lord Chancellor said so, and the Lord Chancellor outranked everyone but the princess. Even the Princess Royal had gone still and thoughtful, weighing it, because what Thorn said was reasonable, and she was a just woman, and a just woman gives weight to a reasonable thing even from a man she does not trust. I had perhaps one chance, and it was not going to come from arguing the facts, because the facts were his. It was going to have to come from somewhere else. And as I sat there at the foot of that black table with the clerk's pens hovering, I understood that the only thing in the room more powerful than Lord Thorn's telling of the morning was the morning's own witnesses, and that I had, without knowing why at the time, let a frightened chamber page stay and watch the whole of it from the gallery arch. But I did not reach for the page. Not yet. A sergeant does not win a council table fight by producing a surprise witness like a conjurer. That is the stuff of tales, and in life it makes the man who does it look like a schemer, which was the very thing Thorn wished me to look like. I reached instead for the only weapon I have ever truly owned, which is the plain truth said plainly, and I rose to say it. Your Royal Highness, I said. My Lord Chancellor describes the morning correctly. I did refuse the Chancellery's instruction. I did send Corporal Brennan to inform you before my lord had assessed the situation. I did bar the door. I will not pretend otherwise, and the record should show all three, exactly as he says. I saw the smallest flicker of surprise cross Thorn's face. He had expected me to fight the facts, and I had conceded them whole, and I saw the princess's eyes sharpen, for she had not expected it either. But the record should also show why, I went on, for a rule built on the what without the why is a rule built crooked, and my lord himself has said we must leave honest instruction for the next such morning. So let it show this. I refused the Chancellery's instruction, because the instruction was to seal the floor and hold the first word of His Majesty's condition until my Lord Chancellor had determined what might safely be said. And Standing Orders, Article 11, forbid any man to come between the stricken king and his heir, and require the heir to be informed and brought without delay and without intermediary. I did not send Corporal Brennan to alarm your Royal Highness. I sent him to obey Article 11, which names you, ma'am, and only you, as the person to be told. And I barred the door not against the officers of the crown, but against the building of a wall around a sick king with one man's hand on the only door. Those are the whys. I'll stand on every one of them, and if the record shows the what without them, then the record is the half-house that gets the next king killed. The room was very quiet. I had said the dangerous thing. I had laid out in plain words the shape of what Thorn had tried to do, and I had done it not as an accusation against him, but as the why behind my own conceded faults, which is a thing a man cannot easily object to. For to object he must explain why determining what may safely be said is a finer principle than telling the king's daughter that the king has fallen, and there is no graceful sentence that says that thing either. I had used his own demand, that the record be complete, that it leave honest instruction, to compel the record to contain the one fact he most needed left out. "That is a grave characterization, Sergeant," said Lord Thorn after a pause, and his voice had cooled by several degrees, the mildness wearing thin at last. "A wall around a sick king, one man's hand on the only door. You impute a design to a faithful servant's caution. I ask that the realm not be panicked by a half-told tale. You make of prudence a plot. I think, ma'am, this rather proves my point about the want of order and now the want of judgment on that floor." And here the game changed. And it changed because the Princess Royal did a thing I had not foreseen, and that Lord Thorn had not foreseen either. She did not rule on it. A lesser authority would have ruled, would have taken my side or his, on the weight of the words, and made a winner and a loser of the morning's account. But Saralind Harrowgate was about to be Regent of Eldermoor, and she had her father's deepest gift, which was the patience to leave a thing unjudged until it could be judged truly. She set both her hands flat on the black table, and she looked slowly down its whole length, at Thorn, at Drummond, at the fluttering castle, at the two clerks frozen with their pens, and at me, and then she said, in a voice as level as my own had ever been, "I will not enter either account as the record, not the sergeant's wise, and not the chancellor's want of order. Because a record entered today, while my father lies between living and dying, and while every man at this table is frightened and tired and reaching for the version of the morning that serves him, is a record that cannot be trusted, not the sergeant's, who is loyal, and not yours, my lord, who are clever, and not mine, who am grieving. We will write nothing into the great book today. We will keep instead every account given by every person who was present, the sergeant's, the captain's, Master Pell's, the footman's, the physician's, my own, and yours, my lord, in full and signed and dated, each apart from the other so that none colors none, and they will be sealed, all of them, and opened and weighed together when my father can speak, or if God wills otherwise, when the realm is calm enough to hear them truly. The truth of this morning does not need to be decided this afternoon. It needs only to be kept whole, until it can be decided well." It was the wisest thing I heard anyone say in the whole of that long day, and it undid Lord Thorn more completely than any accusation could have, for it took the pen out of his hand without taking it from anyone. It gave the pen to all of us at once and to the future, where his cleverness could not reach. He could not write the rule today. He could not make me the cautionary tale today. And every honest witness's plain account, sealed and dated and kept whole, was a thing his telling could never overwrite, because the more accounts you must bend to your story, the harder the bending, and there were a great many honest accounts in that house that morning. "As your Royal Highness commands," said Lord Thorn, and he inclined his head, and for the first time all day there was something in his face that was neither calculation nor concern but a kind of weary respect, the respect of a chess player whose opponent has just made a move he did not see and cannot answer. He had met in the daughter the one thing his whole design had not reckoned with, not a vacuum, but a sovereign awake, unhurried, and entirely unafraid of leaving a question open. I thought then that it was over. I want to set that down honestly because it is the place where the day tried hardest to deceive me. I thought the worst was behind us, the king alive and holding, the heir awake and in command, the chancellor checked, the truth safe in sealed accounts. I walked back up to my post at the king's bedchamber door with something that was almost peace in me, the bone-deep ease of a man who has carried a great weight up a long stair and set it down at the top. I should have known better. I had been a guard for 29 years, and I knew the oldest rule of the post, which is that the danger you have your eyes on is not the one that gets through the gate. While we had all of us, myself, the princess, even Thorn, been fighting over the account of the king's collapse, no one had yet asked the one question that mattered most, the question that should have been asked the instant a 41-year king fell without warning behind a locked door on an ordinary morning. Not who would hold the door, not what the record would say. Why had he fallen? The answer to that question was waiting for me back at the bedchamber, in the hands of a tired physician with a small glass vial, and a face I had never seen him wear before, and it was going to turn the whole morning, the schemes and the articles and the sealed accounts, into the gentle prologue of something far darker. Dr. Wren met me in the antechamber outside the king's bedchamber, and he drew me by the sleeve into the window bay where we could not be overheard, and he was a changed man from the steady craftsman of the morning. His hands, which had not hurried over a dying king, were not quite steady now. "Sergeant," he said, very low, "I must speak to someone I trust, and God help me. After this morning, the man I trust in this house is a sergeant of the guard. Listen to me. His Majesty's collapse is not, I do not believe it is, the ordinary failure of an old heart. I have attended him 20 years, and I know that heart, and this is not its way. The suddenness of it, the manner of his breathing, the color of him, though there are signs, Sergeant, that I will not detail to you because you are not a physician, and because if I am wrong I will have slandered the dead before they are even dead. But there are signs that point another way, and there is this." He opened his broad hand. In it lay a small glass vial, stoppered of the kind the apothecaries fill, a little dark residue dried in the bottom of it. "His Majesty's morning draught," said Wren. "He took a tonic each morning with his letters, a harmless thing, a heart strengthener I have prescribed him myself for 3 years, made up fresh each day by the palace apothecary and brought to him with his tray. I found this vial on the floor of the star room by the hearth behind the fender where it had rolled. He had taken it. It is empty but for the dregs. And the dregs, Sergeant," his voice dropped until I had to lean close to hear it, "the dregs are the wrong color. I have made up that tonic with my own hands 100 times. It is the color of weak tea. This is darker, and there is a bitterness to the smell of it that has no business being there. I cannot prove anything. I am one tired old man with a vial and a bad feeling, which I know is worth nothing in a court of law. But I will not be able to live with myself if I say nothing and I am right, and so I am saying it to you. I think someone may have put something in the king's morning draught, and if I am right, then whoever did it is in this house, and walked these halls this morning wearing a face of grief, and is even now waiting to see whether the king wakes to name what he tasted." I stood very still in that window bay, the way I had stood at the door, while the whole morning rearranged itself behind my eyes. Because if Wren was right, and I am no physician, but I had watched Wren be right about everything else that terrible day, then every piece of the morning that had seemed to be about ambition was suddenly, possibly, about something far older and far worse. A clever man who wished to hold the door of a passing rain was one thing. A man who had arranged for that rain to pass, who had needed only an hour alone behind a locked door, an old man's fixed habit, a fresh draught the wrong color, was another thing entirely, and the same behaviors that had merely looked like ambition in the gallery now looked, in this new and dreadful light, like the calm of a man who had known exactly what was about to happen, and had prepared his face of grave concern in advance, because he had known he would need it. I made myself slow down. This was the very trap I had refused all morning, to leap from a feeling to a verdict, to hang a man on a snagged phrase and a bad color in a vial. I did not know that the draught was poisoned. Wren did not know it. We had a color and a smell and a feeling, and I had stood in a council room not 1 hour past and watched the Princess Royal refuse to write the truth before it could be known truly, and she had been right, and I would be a fool and worse than a fool to do now, in the dark, the thing I had praised her for not doing in the light. "Doctor," I said, "you've done right to tell me, and you'll tell no one else, not yet, not a word, not to your fellow physicians, not to Her Royal Highness even, until we have more than a color. If you are right, the surest way to warn the man who did it is to let it be known we suspect it. He'll have time to make all clean, and will never prove it, and worse, he'll know he must finish what he started before the king can wake and tell us what he tasted. So here is what we do, and we do it quiet as the grave. That vial does not leave your person. You will keep it on you sealed, and you will tell me the name of every soul who touches the king's tray from the apothecary's bench to the star-room door. And you will guard the king's life now not only against his illness, but against the second attempt. For if a man tried once and failed, a man will try again. And the hour of the second try is the hour when everyone believes the danger is past. Wren stared at me. You think they dare, here, with the guard on the door? I think, I said, that a man bold enough to poison a king is a man who has already decided the guard is a row of statues that will not see him coming. And I mean to be the statue that does. It was, I see now, the moment the whole story turned, the moment my duty changed shape under my hands. All morning I had been a guard protecting a stricken man from his illness, and from the schemers who would build a wall around his sickbed. Now I understood that I might be the only thing standing between my king and a hand that had already, perhaps, reached him once and meant to reach him again. The post had become a vigil, and the vigil had become a watch for a murderer, and I, who had spent my life keeping out the loud dangers, the drunk at the gate, the fool who vaults the railing, now had to keep out the quietest danger there is. The trusted hand, the familiar face, the man who belongs in the house. It is the hardest watch there is. It is the watch the statue is least built for. And I was going to have to keep it alone, in silence, with nothing to go on but a vial the color of suspicion. Because the instant I spoke my fear aloud to the wrong ear, the king was dead. I set my watch. I doubled the guard on the bedchamber with men I had chosen by hand and by heart. Brennan, a young guardsman named Tace, whose honesty was so plain it was almost a fault. Old Sergeant Maddox, retired these 3 years but sent for and come gladly, who had taught me half of what I knew and could be trusted to the grave and past it. I let no food, no drink, no draught, no cloth, no thing of any kind cross the bedchamber threshold to the king without passing first through Wren's hands and then my own. I had the apothecary's bench locked and a man set on it, and I began, in the quiet hours of that long afternoon and the longer night, to walk the path of the king's morning tray backward, link by link, the way you walk a fence line looking for the gap the wolf came through. It was a short path and an old one, fixed by years of habit, which is what had made it so easy to poison if poisoned it was. The apothecary, a meticulous half-deaf old man named Goff who had served the crown for 30 years, made up the tonic at first light at his bench and stoppered it in its vial. A page took the vial to the kitchens, where it was set on the king's tray beside his tea and his single boiled egg and his toast, and the morning's first letters. The tray was carried up the kitchen stair by a footman to the gallery, where it was received by the page of the chamber, who carried it the last short way, and set it inside the star-room door for His Majesty to take at his leisure when he came in to his hour. 5 hands then between the bench and the king, Goff, the kitchen page, the footman, the chamber page, and the king himself. 5 hands and a vial that had stood at one point or another, unwatched on a bench, on a tray, on a sideboard, in a gallery, a dozen moments when a 6th hand might have reached it. I will not set down the whole of that night's slow work, the questioning done gently so as to raise no alarm, the careful tracing of who stood where and who passed when. I will tell you only where it led, because where it led is the false dawn that nearly broke me, the moment the morning offered me an answer so neat and so terrible that I almost took it, the way a tired man takes the first chair he comes to whether or not it will hold his weight. It led to the chamber page. The boy, the very boy I had let linger at the gallery arch, the one whose fierce flush of relief had steadied me when I defied the chancellor. His name was Wick. He was 14, an orphan of the city taken into palace service 2 years before, a quiet, watchful, clever boy, and 3 separate things, laid side by side in the small hours, made a picture of him that turned my stomach. He had carried the tray its last stretch and set it inside the star-room door, alone, unwatched, the last hand but the king's to touch the vial. He had lingered at the gallery to watch the aftermath when any innocent page would have fled the scene of his king's collapse. And when I sent quietly to learn what was known of him, I learned that the boy had no people, no roots, no one to vouch for him, and that he had been placed in the palace 2 years before on the personal recommendation of a great officer of the household, Lord Merivale Thorn. There it was, the neat answer, the orphan with no roots placed by the Chancellor, the last hand on the vial, lingering to watch his work. A pawn, taken in young, kept loyal by gratitude and fear, used to do the one thing no great officer could do himself, to put a hand on the king's morning draft. It fit. God help me. It fit so well, and I was so tired, and I wanted so badly for the morning to have an answer that I could carry to the Princess Royal and lay at the foot of the man I already despised, that I came within a breath of believing it. I went to find the boy. It was perhaps 3 in the morning. I found him not asleep, as a guilty boy might pretend to be, nor fled, as a guilty boy might be, but sitting awake on the cold stone of the gallery floor outside the king's bedchamber, as near to the door as my cordon would let him come, his arms wrapped round his knees, his face wet, keeping his own small, useless vigil over the door behind which his king lay dying. And when he saw me, he scrambled up and knuckled the tears off his face and stood as straight as a 14-year-old can, and he said, in a cracked voice, the thing that turned the whole false dawn to ash. "Sergeant, is he, please, is the king? I keep thinking if I'd carried the tray quicker, or if I'd stayed when he came in instead of going like I meant to. I'd have been there when he fell, I'd have caught him. I'd have rung the bell sooner. It's my fault for not being there. Isn't it? It's my fault." And I knew, the way you know a true thing all at once and entire, that this child had not poisoned anyone. I have looked into the faces of guilty men for 29 years, the ones who weep to be believed and the ones who go cold to give nothing away, and there is a thing in a true grief that cannot be counterfeited by a boy of 14 or a man of 60. It does not ask to be believed. It does not perform. It only hurts and reaches and blames itself. This boy was not afraid of being caught. He was afraid the king would die and that he, a nobody, an orphan who loved an old man he was barely permitted to serve, had failed him. The thing that had made him linger at the arch was the same thing that had made him sit on cold stone all night by the door. He loved the king. In the helpless way the very small and powerless love the very great, and he could not leave him. I sat down on the cold stone beside him in my full uniform, a sergeant of the king's guard sitting on the floor of a palace gallery at 3 in the morning beside a weeping orphan, and I said, "It's not your fault, lad. You carried the tray the way you're meant to, and you set it where you're meant to, and you went where you're meant to go. You didn't fail him. And I'll tell you a secret because you kept this watch as faithful as any of my men. He's holding. The doctor says he's holding. That's not nothing. That's the whole battle for now." He looked at me with such naked hope that I had to look away. And as I looked away, down the long dark gallery, I understood the thing that the false dawn had been about to make me do, and how close I had come, and it frightened me more than Thorn had. I had been about to take a frightened, grieving, faithful child and make him a poisoner, because the answer was neat and I was tired, and I already hated the man it pointed to. Thorn had not needed to plant the boy as a murderer. He had needed only to have, somewhere in the past, recommended an orphan for a kitchen post, an ordinary act of patronage, the kind a great officer does 100 times, and the rest, the neat and terrible picture I had built myself, out of exhaustion and suspicion, and the wish for an enemy I could name. If I had gone with that picture to the Princess Royal, I would have ruined an innocent child and discredited every true thing I had to say, and the real hand, if there was a real hand, would have watched me do it and been glad. The false dawn was this, not that I thought I had won, but that I thought I had found the answer, and the answer was a lie I had told myself. The truth was still out there in the dark of the sleeping palace, in one of 5 hands or a 6th I had not yet found, and I was going to have to start again from nothing, with a child's tears drying on my conscience and a king's life ticking away on the far side of a door. So I started again. And this time I did it the way the Princess Royal had taught me without meaning to, not by reaching for the answer that served me, but by keeping every fact whole and letting them lie side by side until the truth showed its own shape. I went back to the vial, not to its color now, but to its life. Where had it been, in the whole of its short mourning, that a hand might have reached it unseen? Goff the apothecary made it up alone at his bench at first light, half-deaf, his back to the door, the bench in a stone room off the still-room corridor. The kitchen page fetched it and set it on the tray in the kitchen, in the full bustle and witness of a working kitchen at dawn, where no quiet poisoning could be done unseen. The footman carried it up the kitchen stair alone, but the stair is steep and narrow, and a man with a laden tray has no hand free for mischief and no place to stop unwatched. The chamber page, young Wick, took it at the gallery and bore it to the star room and set it down inside the door, and went, as he was meant to, leaving the king to come and take it at his leisure. And that was the gap, and I had walked past it 3 times. The tonic was set inside the star room door, and the king did not come at once. He came at his leisure, to his hour, the locked and private hour that all the palace knew was his fixed and unbreakable habit. Which meant the vial stood, full and unwatched, on the sideboard inside the star room for some unknown stretch of minutes, alone in the one room in the palace that every soul had orders to leave undisturbed, the one room no servant would enter, the one room with a door that locked from within, and a service jib in the paneling that opened from the passage with no lock on its face, that I myself had come through, that any man who knew the bones of the house could come through. Into an empty room where a king's draft stood waiting, and no one in all the world would dare to interrupt. The poisoning had not been done to the tray. It had been done in the star room, in the king's own sacred hour, by a hand that came through the jib into the one place no one would look, did its quiet work on the waiting vial, and went out again the way it came, leaving the locked door locked and the secret kept, counting on the very privacy the king prized to be the cover for the deed. It was a thing only a man who knew the house could have done. The jib, the hour, the habit, the unwatched vial, not a kitchen page or a footman who knew the front of the house and the kitchen stair and nothing of the green corridor and the third panel past the linen press. A man of the house, a man of the household, a man who had walked these halls for years. And I had told it, all of it, to Lord Merivale Thorne in the gallery the first hour when I called through the oak. The green corridor, third panel past the linen press, send the physician round through the jib. I had handed the whole secret of the house's bones to the very man I suspected, except that he could not have learned it from me, because the deed, if there was a deed, was already done by then. The king was already on the floor. Whoever had used the jib had known of it before that morning. Had known the house deep, the way I knew it, the way old Maddox knew it, the way a man learns it only by walking it for years, the way Corporal Hask had taught me long ago that a guard must learn the back of a house or know only half of it. The back of the house. Half a house gets your king killed. The old corporal's words went round and round in me, and there was something in them, some thread I could not yet pull, some memory that would not come clear, and I let it lie, because I had learned by now not to seize the first shape a fact offered. I did not have my man, but I had at last the true shape of the thing, a hand that knew the house, that used the jib in the hour, that had no need to be the last to touch the tray. Which meant, and this was the cold turn of it, the thing that put steel back in my tired spine, that my watch on the bedchamber, careful as it was guarding against the wrong attack. I had locked the apothecary's bench and watched the tray and tasted every draught, all to stop a poisoning of the king's food and drink. But a hand that came through hidden ways into private rooms did not need the food or the drink. It needed only a quiet hour and an unwatched moment, and the king now lay in his bedchamber, helpless, unconscious, attended in shifts by tired physicians and tired guards, in a room that I went cold to the soles of my boots as I thought of it. Also had a service passage, also had a jib in the paneling for the laying of fires and the carrying of trays, also had a way in that a man who knew the bones of the house could use while every guard in the place watched the grand front door. I went to the king's bedchamber at the dead hour before dawn, the second night, and I found the jib in the paneling. There is always a jib, and I found in the thin dust along its sill, where no foot should have passed since the maids last laid the fire, the clean fresh scuff of a recent tread. Someone had already found the back way into the room where my king lay dying, and whoever it was had been here, at this door, in the dark, while I was off in another gallery comforting a weeping boy and patting myself for not hanging an innocent, had been here, and had gone, and would, I knew now with a certainty colder than any proof, come back to finish what the first draft had begun, in the one place I had left a way open, on the one night everyone believed the danger was past. I did not raise the alarm. I want to set that down, because it was the hardest discipline of the whole long ordeal and the one that mattered most. Every instinct screamed to fling open the bedchamber, flood it with men, post a guard on the jib, light every lamp. And every one of those things would have warned my quarry off, and a warned man is a man who waits and tries again on a night I am not ready, and I might not catch the scuff in the dust a second time. I had one chance to take this hand, and it was to leave the trap exactly as the trap-setter believed it to be, the grand door watched, the back way seemingly forgotten, and to be myself, the thing he did not know was there, the statue that saw him coming. So I made my quiet preparations, and I set my few trusted men where I needed them, and I told the Princess Royal only this, in 3 words sent by Brennan's mouth and no paper: "Trust me tonight." And then I put out my own lamp, and I took my post in the dark of the service passage behind the king's bedchamber, behind the jib, in the cramped black throat of the house where the fires are laid, with my back to the cold stone and my eyes on the faint gray line of the passage where a man would have to come, and I held still. I held still the way I had held still on the floor of the star room, with my king's pulse under my fingers. I held still the way the post had taught me to hold still through 29 years of cold and heat and provocation and tedium, the long invisible discipline that no one sings of, the stillness that is not absence but the most complete and watchful kind of presence there is. They think the guard at the gate is doing nothing. He is doing the hardest thing. He is being ready, perfectly and without ceasing, for the one moment in 10,000 that is the only moment that matters. I waited for that moment in the dark behind my king's wall, and a little after the deepest hour of the night, I heard it coming. The soft, careful, unhurried tread of a man who knew exactly where he was going and believed, with all his clever heart, that no one in the world was there to see. He came up the passage with a small shuttered lantern, the kind that throws a thin blade of light and no more, and he moved like a man who had walked this way 1,000 times in the dark and needed no light to find his footing, which I understood as he came nearer and the thin blade of his lantern slid across his face, was exactly the truth, for I knew him. It was Master Edric Hale, the keeper of the household's ways. I doubt you have heard the title, for it is an old one and a small one, and the man who holds it is invisible by design. The keeper of the ways is the servant who keeps the service passages, the back stairs, the hidden jibs, the whole secret circulatory system of the palace through which the fires and the trays and the linens move so that the great rooms above may seem to run themselves by magic. He keeps the keys to the passages. He keeps the maps of them in his head. He is the one man in the household whose entire office is to know the bones of the house, every jib, every stair, every unwatched moment, better than any other living soul. And he is so far beneath the notice of the great that he can walk anywhere in the palace, at any hour, on the simple errand of his office, and no one ever sees him at all, because no one ever sees the servant who keeps the walls. I had known Edric Hale for 20 years. He was a gray, stooped, soft-spoken man near 60, courteous to all, ambitious to none, the kind of faithful old servant the great take so entirely for granted that they would as soon suspect the stones of the floor. And I had not once in all my hours of suspicion thought of him, because he was beneath suspicion in the most literal way. He was beneath everyone, the man who keeps the ways, the half of the house that the great never see. He was Corporal Hask's lesson made flesh. A man who only knows the front of a house knows half a house. I had spent my whole career learning the back of the house so it could not be used against my king, and all that time the master of the back of the house had been walking it freely, unseen, unsuspected, the one man whom no watch was ever set to watch. He reached the jib into the king's bedchamber. He set his hand to it, and in his other hand, when the thin blade of his lantern caught it, I saw a small dark vial. "Master Hale," I said into the dark, quietly, the way I had spoken to the king through the locked oak, level and unhurried and without one note of alarm. "Put it down. It's vain. I'm here and I've been here and I have men at both ends of this passage. It's done. Put it down and stand easy." He did not run. That is the thing I remember. He did not start, did not bolt, did not even, for a long moment, turn. He stood with his hand on the jib and his back half to me, very still, and when at last he spoke his voice was not the voice of a man caught in a crime. It was the voice of a man who had carried something heavy for a very long time, and was, in a strange and terrible way, almost relieved to set it down. 20 years I have kept these ways, Sergeant," he said, "and you are the first man ever to stand in them in the dark and wait for me. I should have remembered there was one guard in this house who knew the back of it. I taught some of them, you know, the young ones, where the jibs are so they'd not be lost in a fire. I never taught you. You learned it from old Hask, didn't you, the grim one?" A low, dry sound that was almost a laugh. "He always said a guard who knew only the front knew half a house." He was right. He was right about everything, was Hask. "Put the vial down, Master Hale." He turned then, and the thin lantern light was on his gray, tired, unremarkable face, the face of the most invisible man in the palace, and there were tears on it, which I had not expected, and which made what came next harder than any struggle would have been. "Do you know what I am, Sergeant?" he said. "I am the man who keeps the walls. 40 years in this house, boy and man. I have laid the fire in that room behind you 10,000 mornings before the king ever woke in it. I have carried the trays of 3 generations of Harrowgates up these black stairs in the dark so they might breakfast like the sun rose at their command. And in 40 years not one of them has ever once looked at me, Sergeant. Not once known my name. I am the floor they walk on. I am the half of the house they do not see." His hand tightened on the vial. "And a year ago I learned I am dying. The lungs, the stone dust of these passages, the smoke of 40 years of their fires. A year, the physician said, perhaps less, and then the keeper of the ways goes out the way he came in, unseen, unmourned, his name on no stone." His voice cracked. "And I thought, I will not go out unseen. I will do one thing, one great terrible thing, that the whole realm will feel and never forget, even if they never know my hand was in it. I will bring down the sun itself. I, the floor, will pull down the throne. And then I will be, for once before I die, a man who mattered. I have stood in many dark places in my life, but I have never stood in a darker one than that passage, hearing that. Because it was madness and it was murder, and it was also the most human and most pitiable thing I had ever heard. The cry of a man crushed flat by a lifetime of being unseen until something in him broke and turned the wound outward toward the one thing bright enough to spite. There was no foreign plot in it, no clever chancellor's design, no ring of conspirators. Only one invisible old man, dying, who had decided to be visible in the only way the unseen can imagine, by destroying what the seen most love. The neatest answer I had nearly seized, the orphan boy, the chancellor's pawn, the grand conspiracy, had been a lie, as the neat answers always are. The true answer was small and sad and terrible, and stood in front of me weeping with a vial in its hand. I could have taken him then. He was an old, sick man, and I was a guardsman in my prime. 3 steps and the vial would have been in my hand and he on the floor. But I have learned that there are moments when force, even easy force, is the wrong tool, when a man holds a thing in his hand that could yet do harm, and the surest way to make him use it is to rush him. So I did not rush him. I did the thing I had done all that long day, the thing that is the whole of the post and the whole of the man, I think, if a man is any good at all. I held still, and I spoke level, and I gave the frightened soul in front of me an unfrightened voice to hold on to. "Master Hale," I said, "I see you." He flinched as though I had struck him. "I see you," I said again quietly. "Edric Hale, keeper of the household's ways, 40 years in this house, who has laid 10,000 fires before the king ever woke. I know your name. I have known it 20 years. And I am looking at you now, and I see a man who has been wronged by being unseen, and who is about to do a thing that will not cure that wrong but only drown it in a far greater one. For if you go through that door, Master Hale, the realm will not remember you as a man who mattered. It will not know your name at all. It will know only that a king was murdered in his sickbed by a hand from the walls, and they will pull down the passages you have kept your whole life, and salt the memory of the office, and you will be not unseen but unspeakable, which is a colder grave than any. That is not being a man who matters. That is being the worst thing the house ever held. Is that the last thing you want to be?" He was shaking now, the lantern trembling in his hand, the thin blade of light jumping on the stone. "You want to matter," I said, and I took one slow step, no more, my hands open and away from my sidearm, so that he could see I came as a man and not as a captor. "Then matter. Here is how a man matters, Master Hale, and it is not the way you think. The king lies behind that wall, holding on, fighting for his life by the hour, and the physician does not know what was in the first draft, he suspects, but he cannot prove it, and he cannot treat what he cannot name. You are the only soul alive who knows exactly what you put in that vial. Tell us, and you may save the very man you came to kill. Set down that vial and tell Dr. Wren what was in the first, and you will have done a thing that matters more than any murder ever did. You will have given a king back his life. That is to be seen, Master Hale. That is to be remembered, not as the floor that pulled down the throne, as the man who, at the last, when no one was watching and he might have gone unseen forever, chose to save his king." For a long moment the passage held its breath. I could hear the old man's ragged, ruined lungs working, and the small mad whine of 40 years of grief looking for somewhere to go, and I did not move, and I did not reach, and I let the silence do the last of the work, because there are decisions a man must make alone inside himself, and the worst thing you can do is to reach into them. And then Edric Hale, keeper of the household's ways, made the choice that I have asked the crown and been granted to have remembered. He turned his hand, and he opened it, and he let the dark vial roll from his palm into mine. And then he sat down, all at once, on the cold stone of the passage he had kept his whole life, and he put his gray face in his hands, and he wept like a man whose long, terrible plan had finally broken and let him out. And through the weeping he began to tell me, in a low, broken voice, exactly what he had put in the king's morning draft, and where he had got it and how much. I have him there still in my memory, more often than I have the gleaming moments they have honored me for. The broken old man on the floor of the dark passage, saved at the very last not by my strength, but by his own choosing, telling a guardsman the name of the thing that might yet undo what he had done. I called my men up the passage. They came quiet as I had ordered, no shouting, no rough hands, for the man was no longer a danger, and I would not have a dying penitent dragged through the house like a beast. They took Master Hale gently into keeping. And I went myself, with the dark vial in my hand and his whispered words in my ear, straight through the jib into the king's bedchamber, and to Dr. Wren, who was dozing upright in a chair by the great bed with his hand on the king's wrist even in his sleep. And I woke him with 3 words that I think were the most useful 3 words I have spoken in my life. I know what it was. Wren came awake all at once. I told him what Hale had told me, the name of the thing, the source, the dose. And the weary craftsman's face changed, the way a sailor's face changes when the fog lifts and he sees, at last, the channel home. "That," he said, already rising, already reaching for his bag, "that I can fight. God in heaven, Sergeant, a name. You have brought me a name. There is a thing I can give against that if I am not too late, and we are 2 days in and he is holding, which means we may not be too late. He gripped my arm hard enough to bruise. "Go and wake her Royal Highness. Tell her there is hope, and tell her how it came, and tell her it came from a guardsman who would not rush a frightened man in the dark. Now go and let me work." I will not stretch out the hours that followed, for a sick-room waited in is a slow agony, and the telling of it would be slower. I will say only that Dr. Wren worked through what remained of that night and the whole of the next day, and that the thing Master Hale had named was indeed a thing that could be fought, once it was named, and that names, in the end, were what the whole long ordeal had turned upon. The name of the heir that Article 11 required be sent for. The name of the truth the Princess Royal refused to write before it could be known. The name of the poison, drawn at last from a weeping old man in a dark passage by a guardsman who would not rush him. All of it had come down to the patient, disciplined refusal to seize the easy false answer, and the steady insistence on the true one, which is, I have come to think, the whole of what discipline is for. Not stillness for its own sake. Stillness so that, when the moment comes, you reach for the right thing and not the near one. On the third morning, King Edmund Harrowgate opened his eyes. I was at the door. I had not truly left it, in 3 days and 3 nights, save for the hours in the passage and the council room. Brennan and Tace and old Maddox had spelled me in shifts, but I could not make myself go far, and no one tried very hard to make me. And so I was there when the word came out, carried by the Princess Royal herself, who came to the door with her face streaming and her voice gone and could only nod and grip my arm and nod again. And I understood. And I confess that the sergeant who does not weep on duty wept then, openly, in the gallery, and was not ashamed. He did not wake whole. A thing like that does not give a man back unmarked, and the king was old, and the road of his mending was long and is, in truth, not wholly ended even as I set this down. But he woke and he knew his daughter, and within the week he knew me, and the first thing he said to me, the first whole sentence, in a voice gone thin and slow but unmistakably his own, I will carry to my own grave. He looked at me a long while from his pillows, working at some memory just out of reach, and then he said, "You held my hand. On the floor, I felt it. I was very far down and there was a hand and it would not let go." He had been right that I would not let go. I had been right that he had chosen to hold on. We had both, it seems, chosen correctly in the dark, with nothing to go on but the other's grip. The truth of that morning came out whole, in the end, exactly as the Princess Royal had ensured it would. When the king was strong enough, and the realm calm enough, the sealed accounts were opened together and weighed side by side, mine, the captain's, Master Pell's, the footman's, the physician's, the chamber page's and Lord Thorne's, and laid against the confession of Edric Hale and the testimony of Dr. Wren and the dark vial and its twin. And the truth that emerged from all those whole, uncolored accounts set together was the truth as it had happened, which no single clever telling could any longer bend. That a guardsman had heard his king fall and done every single thing in its right order. That a great officer had reached, in the first confused hour, for a control of the king's person and the king's news that the law of the realm did not grant him, and had been lawfully refused by a sergeant following Article 11. And that the king's life had been saved twice over by that same sergeant, once on the floor of the star room with 2 fingers at a failing pulse, and once in a dark passage where he chose patience over force and drew from a murderer the name that the physician needed. As for Lord Merivale Thorne, I have promised in the writing of this to be just to him, and I will keep that promise even now. He was not the poisoner. He had no hand in Hale's mad and lonely deed. The neat conspiracy I had nearly believed in was, as I have said, a lie I told myself out of exhaustion and dislike. What he was guilty of was smaller and more ordinary and, in its way, more troubling, because it wears the face of duty. In the first hour of a king's fall, he reached to make himself the realm, to control the door and the news and the record, and he dressed every grasping motion of it in the language of order and prudence so well that he half believed it himself. There was no crime in it that a court could name. The Princess Royal regent now, And within the year, when her father's strength failed past mending, and he laid the crown down of his own will into her keeping, Queen Saralind of Eldermoor did not charge him, for there was nothing to charge. She did something quieter and more complete. She thanked him gravely and publicly for his long service, and she relieved him of the Great Seal, and she let it be known, without one harsh word ever spoken, that the keeping of the realm's doors in its dark hours would henceforth rest where the law placed it, with the crown and the guard, and not with any officer however clever. He left the court with his dignity and his pension, and his name intact, which was more mercy than my heart had wanted for him in that gallery, and exactly as much justice as the truth would bear. I have come to think that the Queen's way was wiser than my heart's. The truth, kept whole and let to speak for itself, had already done to Lord Thorne the only thing that needed doing. It had shown, to everyone who mattered, exactly what he was and exactly what he was not, and a man so shown has been answered more finally than any charge could answer him. And the boy, young Wick, the orphan page, who kept his cold vigil on the gallery floor, and whom I had so nearly made a monster in my own tired mind, I made certain his vigil was not forgotten. I told the Queen of it myself, how the child had sat all night by the door because he loved an old man who had never once known his name, and how his grief had been so true that it had been the thing to wake me from the false dawn and turn me back toward the truth. The Queen sent for him and thanked him, and she did a thing for him that I had quietly asked, and that she granted at once. She gave him a name in the world. He is no longer a nobody from the city with no people. He is a king's scholar now, his schooling kept by the crown, and on the day I write this he is a clerk of 17 in the Queen's own household, seen and known and accounted for, which is the very thing poor Edric Hale broke himself for want of, and could not find any honest way to have. I think of that often, that the same hunger destroyed one man, and met with a little kindness, made another. The difference was only whether anyone in time troubled to see them. Edric Hale did not live to stand trial. His ruined lungs took him before the season turned in a quiet room kept gently, not in a cell. The Queen would not have a dying penitent who had, at the last, saved her father's life dragged to a public reckoning. I went to see him once near the end. I do not fully know why. He was very weak and he knew me, and he said only, "Did he live?" And I said, "He lives, Master Hale, and you helped to make it so." And the old man closed his eyes, and something in his gray, unseen face eased, and I left him to it. Whatever he had done one true thing at the end in the dark, when he might have gone unseen forever and chosen instead to be seen saving his king. I have asked that it be remembered. It is remembered. I have written it here. They made a ceremony of it in the end when the king was strong enough to sit through one, which he insisted upon long before his physicians thought it wise. I had asked, through the proper channels, that there be none. A guardsman does his duty and is paid for it, and that is the whole of the account, and I had no wish to be stood up in the great hall and praised for the worst 3 days of my life. The request was noted. The king told me afterward with the ghost of his old dry humor, and overruled. "A king may indulge himself in one thing," he said, "and I have chosen to indulge myself in thanking the man who would not let go." So they stood me up in the great hall after all, under the long row of dead Harrowgates looking down from their frames, and the king, slow now, leaning on a stick, but upright on his own 2 feet, which the hall had not been sure they would ever see again, pinned a thing to my breast that I will not name because the naming of it embarrasses me even now, and the hall was very quiet, and then it was not quiet at all. But that is not the part I keep. The part I keep is smaller and came later and had no audience but the 2 of us. The morning after the ceremony I was back at my post. Of course I was back at my post. Where else would I be? They had offered me a captaincy, a desk, a quiet honored retirement on a generous pension, anything I liked, and I had taken none of it, because a man who loves a thing does not stop doing it the moment he is praised for it, and I loved the post. So I was standing the gallery outside the star room at first light, immaculate eyes forward, the way I had stood at 10,000 mornings, when the king came down the corridor on his stick with one attendant a respectful pace behind, going to his study, to his hour, to read his morning letters in the room where he had fallen. For he would not be driven out of his own habits by what had happened there, and I honored him for it more than for anything in 41 years of reigning. He stopped in front of me. He looked at me a long moment, eyes forward man and stick-leaning man, two old servants of the same long duty, and then he said very quietly, so that only I would hear it, the thing I keep. "Carry on, Sergeant," he said. "That is all, carry on. The plainest order in the whole language of the post, the words a sovereign says to a guardsman 10,000 times without thinking, the words that mean nothing and everything. And he said them to me on that morning, in that gallery outside that door, with the whole unspoken weight of what they both knew folded inside them. And it was the highest honor I have ever been paid or ever will be. Not the thing on my breast. This. That the King of Eldermoor walked back into the room where he had nearly died, past the man who had caught him when he fell, and gave him the ordinary order of the ordinary morning, because the ordinary morning had been given back to them both, and there is no greater gift one man can hand another than the return of an ordinary day. "Sir," I said, and I held the door, and he went into his hour, and I stood my post. The bell in the west tower struck. I counted the strokes, the way I always have, the way I always will. And when the last of them faded, I was still standing where I was meant to stand, eyes forward ready, for whatever the next 10,000 mornings might bring, which is, when all the ribbons and the ceremonies are stripped away, the only thing a guardsman is, and the only thing I ever wanted to be. The man at the door who does not move and does not break and is there,